guys, welcome back to the Steel City Roundtable. My name is Mark. As always, to my right is my lovely guest, Kelly Gibson.
Guest? I'm a co-host, motherfucker.
I knew she'd do that.
You stuck with me, fool. I'm not going away this week.
I know. I can't get rid of this girl for whatever. But welcome back. Thanks for watching us. I wanted to say we had a milestone this week. We hit 50 subscribers on
Oh, my
YouTube.
God. Yeah.
We
Woo!
finally hit 50. I got a little email that said, "Oh, you have hit 50 subscribers." I was like, "Yay!"
Come on, guys. We're getting there. Come on. Give us a listen. You'll like it.
Yeah. So, excuse me. I'm got a little bit cold today. I'm very excited about today's show. Kelly has brought a guest on today that is a criminal defense attorney in the city of Pittsburgh, or the Pittsburgh area. I am just going to introduce her to you guys, and I'm going to let her tell you about herself a little bit. This is Natalie Snyder. Welcome, Natalie. Thanks for coming.
Thanks
My
for having me.
BFF.
Thanks for having me,
My
guys.
bitch forever.
So, who are you?
Who am I? I'm Natalie Snyder. I'm a wife and I'm a mom. If the question is what I do, I'm a criminal defense attorney, former prosecutor, sole practitioner, handle all kinds of crimes except for homicide, sex crimes, and kid crimes, because I just don't want to and I don't have to.
Yeah, well, that's
Fair.
definitely some of the ugliest crimes you're going to see. I mean, you know my background. I'm a police officer, was a police officer for 12 years, so I worked hand in hand with the prosecutor's office and against the bad people. But no, so give us a little bit about your law firm. What's the name? Where's it at?
The name is Natalie Snyder Law. I actually moved my office to my home a few months ago because it was pretty dumb giving somebody else money that I was working hard to make. And we don't do much in the office. We're in the courtrooms. We're not the civil folks meeting with people. We basically see people to have an intro right before court, so it was useless. So I moved it back, so mainly presence online. People find me, word of mouth. I've been around for at least 152,000 years, it seems, in the same building with the same people, and just switch sides at some point. I love what I do. I feel like I actually accomplish stuff. I love when people ask me the question, how do you sleep at night defending and getting criminals off? Basically, unless I'm in a relationship with you, my goal isn't to get you off. That's not how this works.
No.
Boom. There it is. We're done. No, that's pretty awesome. I mean, me being ex-law enforcement, I worked with the prosecutors and against the criminal defense attorneys. Not gonna lie, they were not my friends. They were not my associates. They were people that I had to work with. But through the years, I met some really good ones, like some really nice people. Blaine Jones is actually gonna be coming on here down the road. Blaine, he's a good dude. But so let's start here. So Kelly kind of told me that you are a survivor of domestic violence.
I am, back when I was in college, making wonderful decisions, as we all make as 17, 18, and 19-year-olds. I had fantastic choice in guys. Decided to date a guy who liked to drink more than he liked to hang out with me. It started as a verbal thing, and for those of you that know me, I am not a quiet girl. I have opinions. I make no bones about them. I state them loudly to anyone that wants or doesn't want to hear them. He was not a forward-moving person. He was kind of stagnant where he was. Drank an awful lot, escalated from just really bad fights, but when you're 18 and you think you love this guy and it's great and he's screaming at you and calling you a bitch and calling you a hoe and following you when you leave your dorm room to go next door, where are you going, who is going to be there? The cafeteria is there, and I'm not a small girl, so I want to go eat.
I got the best meal plan, motherfucker.
And wasn't a student, and kind of went from there. The first time he actually hit me, I was sort of stunned because I really didn't understand. And I grew up in a very strict family, lovely family, but he got me started drinking early on in college, like everybody does, but he was kind of the prompter of it. Well, I'm going to call your parents and tell them that you've been drinking. I'm going to call your parents and tell them that you missed your class. Well, I didn't want that to happen, so I just stayed around and took it.
Yeah.
The one night I'll never forget, I lived in St. Martin's on Duquesne University's campus, and I came out the door, and he was standing there. And he started to come towards me, and I literally, like a 2-year-old, ran to the dorm across the street, pounded on the door. I knew the person that was working the security desk because it was all students. Got them to let me in somehow before, because he was a little squirrely thing, and he was fast. I don't know how I ran faster. Not sure what happened. Maybe he was drunk and fell over. Don't know. They let me in, and I literally crawled under the front desk of the dorm and hid like a 2-year-old. And he's outside of the door. He's pounding. He's screaming. He's not a student. Cop. I'm like, dear God, are you kidding me? It continued and continued. At this point, I was working or starting to work as part of the Duquesne Police Department. So this looks really fucking good.
Right. Yeah, that's great.
They're calling, and then it all went from there. There was an incident where he took me elsewhere off campus, and it was an interaction that didn't go well. And so I proceed to try to get back to my dorm from the old, like by the old county airport. Walking down the road at 2:30 in the morning.
Like all the way out past Century 3 Mall.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I grew up in a small town in Pittsburgh, but we don't cross bridges and rivers, so.
I don't leave the north side.
Okay, no idea where I was going. I don't know why I thought I was going to get anywhere. But by the grace of God and a wonderful detective that used to work for Duquesne, who managed to help me and support me and essentially save my life and help me get out of the situation. But it was a situation I stayed in by choice. My choices were bad and they were wrong and they were for the wrong reasons. But I can honestly say I have zero regrets about it happening. I would do it again in a heartbeat. Broken bones, bloody noses, and all of it. Because it made me realize domestic violence sucks and it's not cool, and men that hit women suck, but women that hit men suck too. And, I've learned to see things through a bit of a different lens, which is ultimately I made the decision to stay. And I can't say, I think enough of myself, I can't say, well, I was fully 100% brainwashed and gaslit and, all this other crap into staying. Yeah, he told me he was going to tell my parents, but let's really think about that for a second. They're your parents. It would have been okay. Mm-hmm. Put your pride aside, get the hell out of a bad situation.
They probably would have been more interested in what was happening to you than the fact that you were drinking.
Correct.
But
and I ultimately believe that, and I believed it then. I wasn't a child. I mean, everybody's a child till they're at least 35, in my opinion. But
I'm 40 and I'm still a child.
Well, I hope I will be.
I still look for people older than me.
You're the size of a child.
I am the size of a child. I'm fun-sized.
I'm an attorney, and I have pink eyelashes on my truck. So I'm not one that's going to talk about.
She's also got some badass combat boots on right now, y'all. They're awesome.
I do. So, Survivor by accident, would it have escalated past that? I'm sure it would have. Would I have continued to stay? Probably.
Technical difficulties. Thanks, Kels. If you want me to shut up, just tell me to shut the fuck up.
I didn't realize I did. I was stepping on his cord. I don't know what to tell you. Sorry.
Sounds like personal problems. Sorry. Anyway. So that's kind of that story. Unfortunately, it did not render me very sympathetic towards domestic victims. As a matter of fact, when I was in the DA's office, the one place nobody wanted me to be was in domestic, because I'd be like, well, why'd you stay? Because unfortunately, I think domestic issues is a huge flaw in our system, and the true and real victims still get missed, and we scoop up a bunch of shit. We use it for custody battles and people getting mad at each other and a whole bunch of crap, and women are still out there getting hurt. And in the alternative, it's even worse, because I've actually seen the other end of it, which is men that are victims, and they sure as hell are never coming forward. Yeah. That's a whole, separate segment. But, of course, now with my practice, I don't do PFAs anymore because I just don't have the time to
there's
sit.
Such a problem with that system. We've talked about it before, coming from my background, anybody can get a PFA. Mm-hmm. Anybody, for any reason, you can get retaliatory PFAs. The judges aren't going to deny PFAs because they're afraid to be held accountable. So they're just going to give everybody a PFA. So I agree with you 100%. The real victims, the ones that don't come forward, are the ones that slip through the cracks and end up getting hurt, getting killed, lifetime of torture. Mm-hmm.
And we're still missing them.
Yeah, and until that system changes, we're going to, but, I guess sometimes we got to err on the side of caution. I mean, what's your thoughts on that?
I think we need to, yes, err on the side of caution. Clearly, we don't want people getting killed, but we're not preventing the people that have been tortured for years and years and years in their own homes. The problem is we've emboldened people to use the system as a weapon. And it's extremely problematic because it happens more and more and more. And therefore, it basically becomes a matter of credibility. So the system itself, from my standpoint, has very little credibility. I handle a bunch of domestic cases because, of course, every guy charged with domestic wants the chick lawyer to defend him. It just looks better because you're walking in with me versus one of my male counterparts by perception. The difficulty is what everybody's ignoring in that system is it's so often used in retaliation, in a custody battle, in some ridiculous fight. And it's not even something, for those of us in the system, and Kelly, you've been around it forever, you don't even have to swear it out. You don't even have to take an oath that what you're saying is the truth. You just got to scribble something down on paper. It doesn't matter what happened. And ultimately, a lot of times, the kids are stuck in the middle. And someday they're going to read some piece of paper that say, Dad did all these horrifying things, and what if Dad didn't? And what if, Mom was having a bad day? People argue, people fight. It gets scary, right? Voices get raised. Kids get, have to see it as it is, but it's families, it's life, it happens. But when you ultimately make someone a criminal out of it without having the appropriate basis to even start that ball rolling, because there are lots of people whose lives are ruined because they had a PFA against them.
See, I think one of the issues, go ahead.
I had the same happen. Just so everybody knows, dipshit popped his little ugly turd head up again.
Enough.
To bother me.
Enough. And what are you doing about it?
So my work's actually taking care of it.
Good.
Yeah, so it's that, but.
Because I'm with that standpoint, you can't bitch about it unless you do something about it.
I have my work taking care of it right now because he called my job. Yeah, but I get what you're saying about the retaliatory ones because I got a PFA against him because he literally beat the shit out of me. And he turned around and got a PFA on me. And the judge actually signed it. And basically it said that I drove past his house at this time on this day. And he's afraid for him and his 80-whatever-year-old father's life. And I was like, really? I have video to prove I was in Penn Hills and not Whitehall when that happened.
So what you're saying is you're guilty.
I am. I'm totally guilty.
100%
I was
guilty.
stalking him.
So I want to go back to something you said. The system is flawed. I agree with that 100%. I think besides the attorneys having the ultimate responsibility of presenting a good case and making the foundation for a prima facie case and getting someone charged, convicted, if they are guilty, I think one of the biggest problems in the system, from my point of view, is that the law enforcement officers are put in a really shitty place because they're the ones making that decision on scene to arrest somebody or not to arrest somebody. And the way the laws are written, it doesn't leave any room for discretion. You know that as well as I do. Shall make an arrest if there's signs of injury, corroborating information, blah, 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 blah. And I think, some of the departments, Pittsburgh has gotten a little bit better with domestic violence. I mean, they do the sensitivity training. But I think officers ultimately aren't getting the training to really determine who a primary aggressor is. And, in Allegheny County, they don't want you to take both people. They want you to determine who caused the problem. And I think that's the ultimate flaw, is because you're trusting somebody who may be on the streets for 6 months, has never done anything like this before, and they get to this situation that's totally chaotic, and they have to decide whether they're going to take someone's freedom or not, or whether they're going to take both people's freedom, leave kids alone, all this type of shit. So with that being said, what's your opinion of, how law enforcement approaches domestic violence and how they, they're responsible, their role in the process?
I think that, to touch on something you said, I think training is a really big thing. I think that it's something that doesn't get focused on specifically for domestic cases. One of the things that I also do is I teach at the County Police Academy.
Really?
I do.
Good for you.
I started doing that just with the simulations for hearings. And one of the fact patterns that we had last time was a domestic. So I and some of the others that teach there, all of which are prosecutors except for me, had the opportunity to say, okay, when you get to this situation and it's chaos and it's nutty, here's the things you need to look for. So at least we're trying to front end some of that. I think that it's a matter of where I think a lot of the difficulty comes in is nobody wants to talk about it. Nobody wants to train about it in the sense of, that's going to fall on the FTOs. And a lot of them have been taught incorrectly. Or a lot of them are, taught differently because they've been on the job longer. They can't change what they've been taught, but that doesn't necessarily mean they should be passing it on to the next generation. And I think a lot of what we have forgotten is that the officers weren't there when it happened. We're tasking them with Monday morning quarterbacking to the best of their abilities, and there's only certain things they have to work with. But what has stopped happening is making it important for officers to be allowed to recall their own humanity and look at things from a common sense perspective and a human perspective and listen to your gut, because everybody wants to have things black and white, because someone like me is going to come in and shred the shit out of it if you don't have it.
I mean, cops aren't going to operate that way ever, because if they let their gut take over, they're letting themselves open to a lawsuit. Because, there's a lot of times where the officer's sitting there going, listen, like, I don't want to arrest you, but the criminal code states this is what I have to do. I remember there's a lot of calls that I went to where it was like, oh, he put his hands on me, she put her hands on me. And you get there and like they both have a red cheek, and now you're like, well, what am I supposed to do? So I would take both. I'm like, honestly, if they didn't have kids, I would take both. If they had kids, then I would work harder to figure out what the hell was going on. But unfortunately, a big problem in my mind with the law enforcement community is now they don't want to do shit. Nobody wants to do shit. Nobody wants to make an arrest that puts them on the block, because everybody's going after police officers right now for every little thing. You see it on social media everywhere. You see it on these liberal news stations. It's just they don't have any protection. And I know that sounds stupid to say law enforcement doesn't have any protection. I mean, they got their unions, and they got the Garrity laws, and they got that stuff. But when it comes down to an arrest, if a cop makes a bad arrest, but they're following the system, who gets held accountable for that arrest? It's going to be the officer at the end of the day.
Well, sure, we never hold the system accountable.
Yeah, you're not going to hold the supervisors accountable. You're not going to hold the county academy, whatever academy accountable. And I was a field trainer for 6 years. And I told guys, I said, listen, don't fuck around with domestics. If someone's got a mark, just take somebody. And that was the mentality. Because I was like, I don't want to see you lose your house. I don't want to see you lose your job, your kids, be homeless because you made an arrest or you didn't make an arrest and somebody ends up dead,
Well, and I think it's not just a domestic arrest issue, it's a general law enforcement issue with the fact that, everybody is going off after police right now. But, part of the problem is if you look at it historically, and unfortunately, I was playing around in the system before you were on the job, and we had a lot of the old schoolers. Part of the problem is that for so long, the bad apples got to continue to spoil the bunch until finally somebody stepped in and said, enough of this shit. We're going to stop. And unfortunately, it was, again, like the PFA system, in all the wrong circumstances where it happens, where we've let it run rampant, and where, there's always these phases of, at least from my perspective, of law enforcement where, sometimes what we're looking for at a certain time period is we want more warm and fuzzy. We want better educated officers. We want, this, that. And then there's the phase of we want militant. We want everything stopped. And so that changes. But what hasn't changed is the fact that these are still human beings and they are still people. And I think it starts to take its toll after so long on officers.
Yeah, I think you're never going to see a time where, law enforcement is going to be military anymore, because that's out the window. Everybody hates it. But you were saying how, we were talking about the field trainers and teaching and the way it was done and kind of being dehumanized. All these departments have taken that so far left of where they need to go. As in, now like the city of Pittsburgh, they have this, what's it, City Web or some shit, where the officers are handing out pamphlets on calls to have people go online and say whatever. I mean, they're
no good for my business, by the way.
I know, but they're one step away from handing them a card with the officer's name, the Office of Internal Investigations and an incident number, and saying like, here, listen, when you file my complaint, here's all my information. Like, that's how close it is right now. But I'm going to get off of that because I just, law enforcement. So would you say that with the domestics that you see from your side, that if you can put a percentage or you can put like a scale on it of what's legit and what's not when it comes to a domestic case?
I wasn't there.
Yeah.
I know that I have pretty fine-tuned instincts and pretty good spidey senses.
So based off of your gut.
There's a lot that aren't legit.
Yeah.
There are ones that are, but it's always, I think if we were all going to be honest, and I've talked to younger prosecutors about this, the truth is probably somewhere in the gray that we don't see.
It always is.
Exactly.
It always is.
And we don't, the system can't allow for it. I mean, as much as I see the flaws in the system, I'm happy to point them out, have been for my entire career. It's the only one we have, and I'm still a firm believer in the system. I think that until we let it self-destruct, I think as long as there are some of us in it that want to keep the system going, want to improve it, that it's not going to change, because there's still black, white, and that's never what, in my opinion, that's never what happened. And so I think, percentage-wise, I really don't know, because
It's just too many. Too many are not legit, basically. Too many of the cases you see are not legit because the system doesn't allow for that
to be
gray
vetted,
area.
yes.
Yeah.
And I think, but from my perspective, one not legit is too many.
Yes,
If it got
correct.
past step one.
Correct.
And I remember saying, for years, I had a supervisor tell me when I was in the DA's office, you make a really great defense attorney for a prosecutor. And this was when I was in the DA's office, because it may sound naive after my 24th year of doing this, and most of it's been in the criminal system. I'm still a firm believer that I would rather see, and everybody says, well, then let's put them next door to your house. Okay, I would rather see 10 guilty people walk out this door than have one innocent person lose their freedom.
Oh my God, amen.
Because as far as, and I say this to law enforcement, and I say it to everybody, if they're legit a criminal, you'll get them again. And it's the same as when we talk about like suppression motions and all the other stuff. Like, don't take it personally. It's not a big deal. Just move on. Don't be a nudge. When I found the loophole, that's what I'm supposed to do. And like, one of my most fun arguments, and you'll probably be a good person on the other side of this one, is everybody understands when the Constitution exists so everybody can keep their guns, myself included. Constitution goes out the door when my client deserves a second chance or deserves a fair trial. I'm just trying to get a guilty person off. Same Constitution.
See, I'm at heart, I'm anti, I don't want to say anti-defense attorney. I'm anti-defense attorneys that have no morals. Like defense attorneys that will just, like, it sounds like, and I don't think I've had any experience with you in the past when you were a prosecutor, but it sounds like, it's case by case, right? Like, you get a case, you work it, you do what you have to do. You have to keep your opinions out of it because you got to represent this person to the best of your ability. But I think a lot of times, criminal defense attorneys that I've dealt with, and there's been some good ones, there's been some bad ones, but when they end up realizing that their case isn't that strong, that's when they become indignant, and that's when they become more like dramatic, and they make shit up to try to get cases won.
Well, it's funny that you say that, because I have the exact same experience with officers.
Yeah. I mean, it's
Who will come at me,
there's good and
balls
bad
out,
everywhere, yeah.
belligerent, when.
Because they have a weak case when they do that. It's
Right.
a telltale sign.
And I'm old school, where it's like, let's just have a conversation about it and figure it out. But we're also in this generation. So you've got people working in a human-based system that don't know how to communicate with each other. Where, like, if you're an officer, I know, first of all, let's say hello, we're adults, you're on the other side. And technically, yes, I sit at the other table, but right now you have to sit at the same table with me as former law enforcement. And the key is we should be looking for justice.
I think the thing
That's
is
what we're there
we have
to
a
serve.
very similar mentality in the fact that we want to see what's right done.
Yes.
It doesn't matter how you get there. As long as you follow the rules. The idea of the process is to place the blame on who it belongs to and make that person accountable for what they've done. I agree 100%. There's a lot of people that, there's a lot of cases over the years where, based on statute, you make arrests. And you just sit there like, this sucks. Like, I don't want to arrest this guy. And then you go to court. And so I'm much like you. When I would go to court, I would walk over to the defense attorney. If I knew them, I'd, bullshit with them for a little bit, catch up. But then I'd be like, what do you want to do? And they're like, well, what do you want to do? I said, oh, I want to go to trial. And if I said I want to go to trial, they're like, okay, we work something out. If I went over and said, I don't know about this one, boss, he's like, oh, let's go to trial. That you get this relationship with people where you knew that the good ones were doing the right things, so you didn't have a problem going into a case with them and going head to head with them in a courtroom, because you're like, listen, this guy's just doing his job, and I trust his moral compass. I trust his values. The problem I had was with defense attorneys that just would try to belittle officers on the stand and belittle the victims. Like, there's no place for making anyone in a courtroom feel like shit. They're already feeling like shit because they're in a courtroom.
Agreed.
Farrell used to take me to court with him all the time. You know that. And I'd sit through like the first half of the trial, and then he'd come to me, and at like the half, like everybody, we're taking a break, 15 minutes, you know what I mean? Like, especially for like the homicide trials. He'd go out in the hallway, and we go into the stairwell, and he'd be like, what do you think about how I'm handling this witness? And there's been a couple times that I'm like, you need to back off. You're being a dickhead, and that they're alleged victims that, that he is going after,
Well, and part of it is personality driven, though. I mean, I run a different risk because I'm a woman and a feminist. I'm not, but there are very few female criminal defense attorneys other than PDs. There are very few private ones, but women tend to weed out of the criminal system as everybody sees it. But I run the risk of, even when I'm just doing my job, because I'm a woman, because I'm loud, and because I make a lot of noise, I'm just ultimately going to be a bitch. And somebody's going to assume that I'm attacking them or attacking their victim when they simply don't like the tone of my voice that I talk to everybody with.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So when I walk in those doors, the tone I took outside the doors is the exact same as the one I have in here. But now I'm a bitch. And now I'm trying to degrade somebody. And now now it's perceived a lot differently, because it's just, we walked in the door, and it's literally, and I'm thinking, I don't have that many tones in my existence.
Right.
I'm a fairly monotone person. I don't yell. So it's always the same. But all of a sudden, it has become different. And I think that that's a risk that all of us run, But I think that what it really comes down to, like you said, Mark, is about a moral compass. But everybody has to understand that ultimately every person has the right to a defense, has the right to not get ramrodded through the system, and further, that justice should be the goal. I mean, we all take an oath. You guys, law enforcement takes an oath. There are certain things we're responsible to do, but ultimately, whether we go to trial or not, yes, we can push it, but it isn't ultimately our decision. It's our client's decision. And yeah, can you sway things with your opinions, your thoughts, your experience on, the judges or the type of case or whatnot? Yes. But I think, like you said, if everybody's minds, morals, and hearts are in the right place, then the system does work. Is it going to be perfect? No. Are there I've lost cases on both sides where I'm like, how the hell did I just lose that case?
Right.
And I've won cases where I'm like, how'd that happen? I thought it was pretty crappy. But what I've never done is had a case come back to me that I felt went a way that I wasn't comfortable with, where I really felt like, say if it was when I was prosecuting, I never had a guilty come back for someone that in my heart and in my gut, I was like, there's no way in hell this person did that. Because if I'm even questioning that, I should not have been standing there. And the same on the other end as a defense attorney. I just don't take the cases. Not everybody has that benefit to be able to not take things, but I'm not going to stand there and be like, I don't know.
When it's all said and done, you got to be able to sleep with yourself at night. You got to be able to go home and be like, I did what I thought was right.
Correct.
Based on what I believe. And being an attorney, it's tough because your beliefs, not you personally, but an attorney, if some attorney's radical in the press or in the news, then when they come to court, it's a fucking circus. Then the legitimacy of the process is gone. Because when they for example, I'm going to go a little sideways here. You know how preliminary hearings go. They're supposed to be like 5 minutes. Is there prima facie? Was there a crime committed? Do we have enough evidence to believe that the person sitting right there is the person that did it? And over the course of my career from 2017 to 2019, I noticed that preliminary hearings got progressively longer. Like, you would be in there for like an hour. You would have a full trial. And, judges at the magistrate level would try to put people in contempt in a preliminary hearing. And you can't.
Thank God. I was threatened a few times.
The one thing we're definitely going to agree on is that I think we're going to agree on is that the quality of judges now is questionable at best, because political beliefs are now becoming more a part of the judiciary process, where you have a socialist judge, you have a libertarian judge, you have a Democrat judge, you have a Republican judge. They all have their own opinions, and it seems like me at the end of my career, like, it was becoming more difficult for these judges to separate themselves from their political beliefs. Example is we had a socialist judge that was working in Pittsburgh when I was at the end of my career. And with narcotics, we did overdose investigations. So, you know the law. Does a dead person have standing over their phone? No, they're dead. I mean, now, if the phone's to another person that pays the bill, then that person can determine what happens with that phone. But we got search warrants for the phones to be safe, to cover our bases. And this socialist judge would not approve warrants for dead people for us to further our investigations. So anytime an officer saw that they had that judge, they just were prepared to come back with an unsigned warrant and go back again when the next shift started. So that's one of the big reasons why I got out, is because I didn't feel like the judges were qualified anymore. You have some judges that like to preach. I'm not going to mention his name, but he's been retired for a while, but his first name started with P and it ended with a teat. He used to preach, and nothing ever got done in his courtroom. And it's sad because you're doing what you feel is right, and you're doing what you get paid to do, and the officers are doing what they get paid to do. And the judges are the only ones that aren't held accountable. They can do whatever they want up there, for the most part, pretty much. Unless, there was a judge that was just recently removed because he was an idiot. He was also a socialist, by the way.
Well, in the interest of my own personal best interest, I'm not going to step on that slippery slope of whether people are qualified or not qualified. But what I will say,
Good answer.
What I will say is, I don't believe that politics should play a role on the bench.
It should.
I just, as a general concept, I hate when, one of the bright lines for me is I hate when people say, well, this judge is very prosecution oriented. You hear more, this judge is very defense oriented. This judge, again, they shouldn't be either. And so, in that sense, I'm going to presume that people got to where they get for reasons. But I am not a fan of elected judges in general.
Well, it's not a popularity contest. It's who can do the better job.
Right, but yet, if it wasn't an elected position, I'm not sure who I would think should be the person picking the judges. So it's kind of a catch-22.
I mean, it's a dangerous. It's really and I'm not bad. I'm not like sweeping it with a broad brush saying that all judges are bad. I'm just saying that, as we progress into this, pronoun generation or whatever you want to call it, where everything's upside down and everybody gets a trophy for showing up, and I didn't get that job making $12 an hour at Burger King. I'm so fucking sad. I'm going to go get depressed, and life just. The value of the experiences that we go through, the value of what we learn in life is being lost right now. All these opinions that you have are there because you've had those experiences. Like you said, very importantly, that you would not change a thing. And I agree with you 100% because we are not who we are despite what we did and who we were. We are who we are because of what we've done. And I would not be doing this. I would not be where I am. I don't think you would be where you are if we didn't make these huge, giant mistakes. But coming around full circle, like judges, attorneys, lawyers, you really don't have the ability to make mistakes. Big mistakes cost you everything.
I mean, I remember a judge that was forced into retirement, maybe.
Was it that same one that started with P and ended with Atit?
No.
And I'm not talking about the son, I'm talking about the father.
Anyway, she was really, really hard on a specific set of offenders, and it became increasingly apparent that she was very, very hard on them. And she made some comments, and then they said, you need to retire.
Well, and I think it just goes back to what we all know is it's a human system, and no human's perfect. And after so long, it gets hard not to look at things in certain ways or become jaded or become, numb. And that, I think, is the biggest problem, is numb. Once you stop on, quote unquote, either side of this, once you become numb, you need to get the hell out of this system.
That's one of the reasons why I left, is because I got to the point where I went out to court. I didn't care left or right. It's like, whatever, I'm getting paid for this. I'm going home at the end, whatever. Nobody cares, and that was just me. We're kind of got like way off track like we always do. But yeah, I mean, like attorneys, cops, judges, they're all in a position where everything they do is ridiculed gone over, triple checked, quadruple checked, Monday morning quarterback every day of the week. What was it? The judge at, was it Southside Magistrate just got, or a few months ago got taken off the bench because he wasn't giving violent criminals bonds.
And
I mean, because I remember there's like some case where I think the guy got arrested in Florida, and he was let go up here, and he like had a violent history, and they put a no monetary bond on this guy, and he left and went. I think he killed or stabbed somebody in another state, and it was a pattern of behavior with this judge. Now, this is as deep as we go into politics. It just happened to be that he was a socialist, but that's where the problem with the politics coming into it is like this guy. It seems like, from my viewpoint, that socialist judges tend to be a little more on the lenient and more forgiving side and not hammering people when they do crazy shit and giving them the bonds they deserve. But that's just my personal opinion. What do you think they can do, if anything, to try to, bring this around full circle to where it goes back to where it was, 50 years ago, where it was like, judges did what they were supposed to do. And they didn't let their personal opinions, they didn't let their personal beliefs and all that shit get involved.
the system's always going to be flawed. It's never going to be perfect. As far as going back to 50 years ago, even I'm not old enough to have been practicing then.
Well, you said you were
182,000 years
Yeah,
old or something like
something
that. But at the same time, this is still, and understand why I'm saying this is still the system that I have to operate in and I have to function in. And I believe that, it's gonna hash out the way it is. We're never gonna be able to make it perfect because people are still gonna be people. But from my perspective, you said, nobody can afford to make mistakes. Well, prosecutors, to some extent, have a little more ability to make mistakes. Officers, well, that's a whole separate subject. Yeah. But, if I make a mistake, there's a kid growing up without a parent. Mm-hmm. If I make a mistake, there's a needle in someone's arm. Mm-hmm. If I make a mistake, somebody's calling the disciplinary board on me. If I make a human mistake, if I miss something, or even if I didn't think of it. So I think that unless we want to have everything and everybody be calculated into a completely non-human system, we're never going to have that. Nobody can be void of their opinions and the bias that they bring to anything. And if you say you're a bullshit liar. If you're going to stand up there and say, I bring none of my own thoughts, you cannot remove them from your internal being. Should they be able to affect what I do? Should they be able to affect how I defend my clients? No, they absolutely shouldn't. Are there going to be times where those thoughts are going to happen? Absolutely. I can't, but I also look at my job as a lot of what I do is hand-holding, and I don't say that in a condescending way. But I'm there to be supportive of people at a really shitty time in their life.
Process.
Yeah. And that's a huge part of what I do. And to, look beyond, just X, Y, and Z happen. But I think that probably the main thing that we could do to improve, how about improve? Improve this system is to get rid of everybody's stupid ass egos.
Yeah, I mean,
and that is where I think a big part of the problem happens from, and I'm sorry, but I've said it, I've prosecuted officers, I've defended officers. I've been on both sides of the whole thing. But it starts there too, and that makes, everybody has to admit, it's sort of like the first step in recovery is acknowledging you have a problem. The first step in fixing this is check your ego at the door, because that's not why you're doing this. It didn't suddenly become my client, it's an aggravated assault, and I've had this because he looked at me wrong. Oh. Go measure your body parts, from cops to the defense attorneys to the judges. Go measure your body parts. Let's deal with that ahead of time and bring what actually exists. Let's everybody stop being ridiculously fragile, acknowledge each other's issues. And I sound very kumbaya by saying that, but unless the ego thing is removed where everything becomes a competition, I simply, and I've had this happen so many times with officers, both as a prosecutor and as a defense attorney, when I'm coming at you because I have a legit issue, unless I'm giving you glowing praise, you're taking it as a personal attack, and you're getting defensive. And I can tell you all the day long, I'm going to sit there like this, because if I can make you, just by being me and just by doing my job and not pushing it, poke at you enough that I cause you to launch, you shouldn't be sitting there.
I mean,
right.
Ultimately, personal beliefs and all this shit has to be separate. You know, you can have the thoughts, but I get what you're saying. It's like, you know, law enforcement officers. I always go back to that because I don't know much about law, so just kidding. No, you know, law enforcement officers, they have to compartmentalize. You got to separate that shit from your mind, because if you have it in there when you go to a call, you're going to make a call based indirectly or directly off of what the thoughts are that you have about that person. So it's got to be the same as an attorney. Like, you have to go in there as a blank slate and be like, this is the case. This is what I'm focusing on. Whatever. I hate this guy. He's a piece of shit. I don't like him, but that's not part of my job.
Yeah, and it doesn't matter. I've had, clients that we don't particularly get along. We probably wouldn't hang out if we weren't in a lawyer-client relationship. And I've had clients that I think, would be neat to go out and have a beer with. I'm not, but, wouldn't be bad to hang out with. But it doesn't matter. It inevitably, and, any other defense attorney, I'm sure there's everybody says, well, do you ask your clients if they did it? It doesn't matter. I have a specific job to do. Cite point 2. Unless I'm in a relationship with you, my job is not to get you off. I am here to do this prescribed job. In the end, could that result in the fact that you walk away with an acquittal? Absolutely. Am I going to shut that down and say, no, take it back, please convict my client? Hell no, I'm not. But I'm also the same person where if I win a case because somebody didn't show up, my ego's not that fragile. I'll take that win.
Right.
It's not any different of a win to me, because that's on someone else than I made some stellar great legal argument. If it's just because, I'm at summary appeals on a traffic thing and the officer doesn't show up, that's the same kind of win as if we went toe-to-toe and took the win. Mm-hmm. It just took less time. So I'm all for efficiency. I'll take that one. But I think that, no, you can't separate out. We all have to compartmentalize, but we can't compartmentalize ourselves into not seeing, that things happen, how they happen, and how people get to where they are. Like, I get a lot of cases where people have, addiction issues and alcohol issues, and not just DUIs, but, something that is not a directly related type of thing, not a DUI, but it's an assault and not a domestic, but, somehow you need to figure out who that person is. And I think prosecutors need to have the same. If you have someone that may or may not present as credible, you might need to, you definitely need to kind of look into that before you're putting your case forward. Mm-hmm. And I think that a lot of that is what gets shoved and somebody has to bring to light, because, we may not want to handle things in the same way, because if I have a client that has 27 cases or something, clearly there's something going on. And
they're clearly innocent.
Well, duh. Absolutely. And even if they are, something has caused this to continue to happen. And we've had cases where it literally has been misunderstandings of either mental illness or addiction between behavior of someone and law enforcement, and a lot of that happens not as much in the city, but like in smaller towns where they don't necessarily understand or look at things in the same way. So, part of my job is to be like, hey, look, no, it's not just that I want my client to not go to jail. I don't want him to go to jail, but if we go through this whole process and we get to the end of the process and we haven't resolved whatever the root is of all of this, it's just going to keep happening. And people look at me like I'm crazy when I say, I am crazy, but differently, is the fact that ultimately, I think we don't want this to continue. We don't want people to continue to rob other people. We don't want, it's bad, again, bad for my business, but I really don't want that to continue. And if we can address what's causing this, because I would venture to say, in my experience, the vast majority of people that I see, not just my clients, but of people that I see day to day in the system, you're like, something's up there. No, you can lead a horse to water. You can't always force.
Well, it's so much easier. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, well, then you also have the drug court. We have mental health court. Those type of things to help along. Do you do mental health court?
I do some things in mental health court, just because it doesn't seem to fall.
Are you looking for an attorney?
It does.
Yes.
It
always.
Well, birds of the feather. It doesn't always fall in that realm, But I think that it kind of, one of the other things, it's just popped into my head. You said, how can we fix the system or make it better or make it work more efficiently would be great. But, is addressing a lot of the underlying human issues that everybody in this system has. Because if you really think about it, and I still consider you part of the system because you lived it for so long, those of us, whether it be the court staff, the magistrates, the judges, the prosecutors, the victim advocate, everybody in the system, you know, we're the only people that understand what each other sees every single day. And, you know, we all have kind of dark, twisted, messed up senses of humor because it's how we handle and we process. But we don't, you know, having those interactions where an officer, you know, comes in and you shoot the shit for a little while really makes a huge difference, I think, in how we make the system work, because it's also good for our mental health, because we know that you get what you may not like it, and I may not like how you do things, but we know, you know, we smell each other in a crowd. You can tell other people, and there's only this handful of people where there's no way when you were on the job, you almost stop talking because you don't want to go and explain to your family member that has no idea, because just saying I did X, but there's also 15,000 other things that you don't understand. I got to start from the beginning. I'm just not doing it.
I have that same problem when I'm talking to like anybody about my job. Like if I'm talking to my boyfriend about my job, I say,
You got to give him crayons and a piece of construction paper and draw it out for him.
I mean,
Not him personally, but people that don't
anybody,
understand.
yeah, like, cause like I'll say like I had to do this thing today, and he'll be like, oh, okay, and I was like, oh, you do this thing because these things happen, and at that point they stop listening.
Well, and it's so much easier. You know, my husband is a retired police officer, and it's so much easier because I can say, you know, stupid things like, what do you have going on this week? I've got a suppression motion on X day in X courtroom, and, you know, I think the cop's a piece of shit. Now, he doesn't love every time I say that, but it does happen, and it is said, and, you know, but I don't have to explain what a suppression motion is. Mm-hmm. I don't have to explain what my parameters are of why I think this person's a piece of shit. You know, and so those of us that can do that, and it's a thing with me that I preach, I will always, if we had a hearing and it went really badly for me or it went really badly for you as the officer, no matter how it went, when we're done, we're done. I will walk over, I will shake your hand. And I love, sarcastically, the officers, and you and I never had a case together, so you know this isn't aimed at you, but I love the officers who, I've done my job and you screwed something up, and I brought that to light and your butt hurt and you turn your back on me and you walk out. Mm-hmm. I did my job.
I mean, it's a game. It's a game a lot of the time. It's like, did I do my job well enough to beat you?
Right. And to me, you know, officers that are, you know, there are certain ones where it's like, if they said it, you know it's true.
Yeah.
And you know they did, and you know their shit's solid. And then you work from there. But that doesn't mean I'm still not going to have a hearing, but they get it. And my thing is I'm not coming at you personally. You know, I may be coming at how you performed your job because that's what I'm supposed to do. But good defense attorneys make good officers better officers. Mm-hmm. Good cops make good defense attorneys better defense attorneys.
Well, how many times do you see shitty reports come in front of you? Like it looked like it was written by like a 14-year-old on ADD meds, you know,
or not on ADHD meds,
or on something.
When I was still in Everest, I did excuse me. I did an externship at the Allegheny County Police, the detective unit, and they would have me go over their reports, and I'd be like, bro, do we use periods in law enforcement?
And it's funny. I'm so glad you said that because I went on a rampage at the academy about this. Because to me, if I'm able to point out that you can't use punctuation or capitalize a letter, you just make yourself look stupid, and you're honestly giving me an open door to something that's senseless. But it's also a matter of professionalism.
Yes.
Like when
double
you
check,
as
triple check, quadruple check.
Yes, ask someone else to look at it. Put your ego aside, ask someone else to look at it.
See, my partner's always messed with me because if I made an arrest, it took me 4 or 5 hours to write the report because I have OCD and ADD. Like, I would go over it and over it and over it and over it, and they'd be done with all their shit. They're like, bro, like, what are you doing? It's like, you know, certain departments, they don't teach the right shit. You know, like report writing. I think I had a class. It was like an hour and a half long on report writing when I was in the academy. I'm like, that should be like 6 months because that's what you do 99% of the time is take reports. You know, when I was when I was training people, I would tell them, like, listen, pretend like you're going to take that report and give it to Joe Schmo, the dumbass at Giant Eagle, who has no idea what the hell is going on, and that he's going to read it and understand 100% what you did, why you did it, how you did it, and what it was legit that you did it. And I think, that's one of the biggest problems in, the judicial system is law enforcement officers, and this is a sweeping generalization, as a whole, write shitty police reports. That's just my personal opinion. There are ones that do very well, but as a whole,
sweepingly agree with you. And the unfortunate part is the individual officers are going to be the ones who individually pay the price for me making you look like a dumbass on the stand. And the part that's sad about that is they haven't been taught. But the flip side of that is once they get to a certain, because it was only an hour and a half, and now I'm out of the academy. So now there's nothing else for me to learn, nothing else you can teach me. I refuse to learn. You're just now being a bitch. I'm not learning anymore. Nope, taking my ball and going home. And it's pointless and it's stupid because you can say things like, there are some officers that write really awesome reports where I can pick it up and, having not been there, know exactly what happened from the officer's perspective. And there's other ones where I'm like, what? And what are we saying? And what are we doing? And,
it makes no sense.
It doesn't. And the difficulty with that is, from my perspective now as a defense attorney, how that looks to me is it was shoddy work, and your arrest of my client was shoddy.
It may have been the best arrest in the world, but it was written like shit.
It might have been, but all I have is what's in front of me.
Yeah.
And so I'm sitting there going, this guy's family had to put up their house to get him out of jail on this?
Like a lot of officers, they put the bare minimum in the affidavit of probable cause, because you can do that. You can put the
Yes.
bare minimum. What was your probable cause? What did you do? What happened? Okay, cool. I was always of the opinion that I'm putting the same shit in there that I put in my organizational reports, because you're going to get it anyway.
Well, the caveat to that, and I tell recruits this, is because, I'm very tactful and I sugarcoat things with
I've
people.
noticed.
Oh, yeah.
Is make sure you're smart enough to remember what you wrote, and perhaps definitely look at it before you testify. If you're someone who's going to write a more extensive affidavit, that's fine.
Have that in front of you.
But be smart enough to know what you said, because if you're not, then you're starting on the slippery slope where you're not going to have your report in front of you. It's evident to me in 0.2 seconds that you didn't review it before you took the stand. And you say something, and it's in front of me, and you say something, and I'm like,
Yep.
hold on, let me get my Sharpie highlighter. Here, officer, on the record, can you please read what you wrote right after it happened? Because that's not what you just said now. And while it might just be a misstep or a slight aside, you now look like a liar.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think officers today realize that if you're caught once, every attorney knows about you now.
Oh,
and every
yes.
attorney's going to know your weakness. They're going to know your kryptonite. And then the judges are going to start to learn who you are. And if you start making mistakes consistently, your credibility goes to shit. And then any arrest you make is literally like everybody in the DA's office, every criminal defense attorney is like, I want that one. I want that one. That guy's a fucking idiot. I've been in 6 cases with that guy. I've beat him every time because he writes shitty fucking reports. He testifies like a moron, and he's probably half a sloth. And that to me, like, I'm not saying I had a different mentality, but for me, it was a matter of personal pride. Like, I had one suppression hearing in my entire career, and I won. Like, that for me was like, because I wrote everything I did, and I wrote it in specific detail. And I was a guy that showed up to the preliminary hearing like, Officer Kneebone, oh, let me refer to my report, sir. I wouldn't read off of it, but I would look back at my report and go, yeah, I said it right here. What happens is people take their reports up there, and they read from it. That's not testimony. That's reiteration of your
That's
your
reading
report.
aloud.
Yeah,
Yeah.
You have to know your case. And that's why I agree. I like the way you're talking about, look at your shit. Know your shit. Make cue cards of the key points so you have it with you, because they're going to ask you the important shit. If you made an arrest where you had to use physical force and you found something, search incident to arrest, like,
Own it.
make a note.
Own it.
And because they're going to ask you, like, as an officer, what they're going to ask. Where did your probable cause come from? Well, right there. So write it down somewhere. It's the whole process. I know we've gotten way off target, but
We
I think this is important.
I do think it's important because I think, it's so much, again, of the system, and one of the reasons that I'm still in it is the relationships that we all build with each other. And I think that that's super important. And I think we're not going to single-handedly change the system, but in our little part of it, we can at least make it work the way we think that it should. And I think that ultimately protects officers. I think it protects defendants. It's certainly, I mean, job security for us, but one of the biggest things I say to people, and the closest people in the world to me, from my husband to some of my dearest friends, are law enforcement. So, yes, I have an absolute mission to bring to light any dirty cop I see.
As you should.
Even a potentially dirty cop.
As you should.
Because and I don't mean bad cop, I mean dirty, wrong, no morals, no ethics. You should not have a badge on.
There's a lot more of those than we would like to admit.
There are, and nobody wants to say it. And people look at me, and I've pissed off my friends. I'm sure I've pissed off my husband with my rampages about it. But I'm going to find you, and I'm going to blow it up, and I'm going to tell everybody I can see, because you put people I care about the most in danger. And I don't take that lightly.
I mean, the only way you really see that now in any kind of mainstream form is social media. Social media, everybody who has an account that can hide behind their computer will say shit, but that same person would never say that in front of a cop or in front of an attorney or in front of a judge, because, as Kelly has so eloquently put, people have forgotten what it's like to get punched in the face.
Oh, yeah, I say that a lot.
They have.
See, I listen to you.
In the same vein, when you keep running into the same handful of law enforcement whose body cams seem to malfunction all the time, or their mics
That's
are
because they're made in North Korea.
potentially valid, maybe, but when it's the same ones over, it's like,
Yeah, I mean, you make a reputation for yourselves. I mean, there was guys that I worked with that when we were on a case together, I did everything I could not to have them testify, because they were just so bad on the stand. It was like, I didn't want them to talk. I wanted them to sit there like a mute and not say anything, because the minute they open their mouths, it's what's a cop's job in a case? Yes, no. Those are your answers 99% of the time. Or you answer the question directly. You don't give like openings to attorneys. You know as well as I do. When you had an attorney that would be like, "Yes, Your Honor, I did this," you're like, "Oh, jackpot! I'm going to listen. I'm going to find something he said, and I'm going to come back on it and use it against him." It's yes, no. I don't recall. Keep it
That's
simple,
what I was
stupid.
just going to say. That was Farrell's
Occam's
favorite.
razor. Keep it simple, stupid.
I don't recall.
but
Let me refresh your memory.
Yeah, but I mean,
if
like,
you've done nothing wrong, I mean,
Yes.
cops spend so much time and lose so much credibility because they're uncomfortable in their own skin, because they haven't dealt with their own issues as people. So they're uncomfortable in their own skin, and they're trying to make it look better than it is. And ain't none of us smart enough to keep up with all those lies that we've put out there to people, and you need to stop. And that's the biggest part of the problem, because we can all agree there is a certain personality type, mentality type that are the players in the criminal justice system. A lot of us have very similar personalities to each other. And I would venture to say there's a personality type that fits for a law enforcement officer. It just does. I'm not saying it's a bad thing. It's fine. But what the problem is when any of us are uncomfortable in our own skin, and as people, you start making shit look bad. And when that starts to bleed into your professional life, where, you're insecure, or you feel like, or that you thumped somebody that you shouldn't have, we probably should cover this in advance. And I used to say, it used to be in the system way back when, you either got street justice or courthouse justice. You don't damn get both. Please, detective, do not, and I said this to people when I was down, a prosecutor, please do not come in here and I call you, and when you go to identify the person, I look over and I'm looking at a mugshot where you beat the snot out of someone on some piddly charge where nothing in what I'm reading gave you justification to do that. Because now I want to walk back this entire hearing and I want us to go sit down and work this case out, because I just opened a door that shouldn't have been open. But, people move forward with things that they shouldn't have, because everybody's got too much pride to ask a question or be unsure. And especially in the system, because we all have that personality type where it's hard for us to admit our own insufficiencies. Mm-hmm. And it's hard for us. But I loved, when I was a baby DA, having those certain judges where you were comfortable enough and they were quote unquote safe enough places for you, you could be like, all right, how'd I do in that trial? And you would get the good, bad, and the ugly. I don't want sunshine up my ass. I mean, I'll take a compliment, but we should all want people around us who are going to tell us what wasn't right, what we fucked up, because that's the only way we're going to get any better. And until we don't feel so defensive with each other, like I love having officers who are like, don't go there. Okay. Don't know what that meant right now, but I'm sure that's going to weed it out and I'll understand this in a minute. And I love having, friends where they're like, yeah, it might not have been the best thing. Let's just figure something out.
I mean, if you're righteous, right? Like, if you do it the way you're taught, if you do it the way that is moral and just, and I think that's the problem with law enforcement these days is they're not taught what's moral and just. That's what your parents do.
Yeah.
Right? You come if you're a shitbag when you come to the academy, you're going to be a shitbag when you leave with a shield.
Facts.
Same thing with attorneys. Same thing with judges. If you're a mess, you're a mess no matter what. And so
and the letters
frustrating
behind your name and the badge.
They don't mean shit.
It's not going to change. If you're a hot mess, you're a hot mess. So again, it goes back to, like you said, look at what you did. If you made a mistake, okay,
Own it.
Own it. You made a mistake. Don't. If you wait for me to point that out, it's not going well for you.
Yeah, we're talking small mistakes. We're not talking beating someone half to death over a stolen candy bar.
We're talking like stuff that ultimately just becomes a matter of risking your credibility because I'm going to point out that you seem to not know how to capitalize letters. And so therefore I've basically been able to paint you as a dumbass and not knowing what you're doing, and therefore you're not qualified to have made the arrest that you made. All this over punctuation?
Yeah, your motion says sick, blah, 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 sick, blah, 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 blah.
When and that's avoidable stuff, but and until I've had people be like, all right, you went a little too far with that, but again, like you said, we all have to look in the mirror, we all have to go to sleep at night, and I think that's something that generally as a society has gotten so lost is things like integrity and your word. And a very old-fashioned system, I mean, where I still believe, and I've had it happen, it's a little bit awkward to try to teach newer officers this when they're just looking at you like, you're a defense attorney, I'm not going to trust anything that you say.
Well, you're going to spend most of your career talking to these people.
Right, and it's like, but what I'm actually saying is, I don't want to see you lose your credibility because once you do, then you're potentially looking at a new title called defendant as an officer. You're potentially looking at losing your house, your wife, your kids, and everything else that means anything to you.
Yep.
So let me help you. And at the same time, I want that help too. But until we can all kind of check that for a second, and somebody's got to be mouthy and loud and determined to make people talk about their shit. And I apparently have taken that on myself.
Well, like I said, there's not a whole lot that you said that I don't agree with. But let's go back.
She's a smart cookie.
No doubt.
I know.
I just say it again. You agree
so
with me?
smart.
No,
What
no,
is
no.
it with this compliment mongering? Anyway,
I'm a woman. It's what we do.
That's all right. We fix each other's crowns.
so let's go back to your days in the PD's office.
DA's office.
Or sorry, DA's office. So what was that like? Being handed these cases that you look at and you're like, oh, Jesus Christ, not again.
It was so much of a rat race, and how we had to do things. There wasn't a ton of prep time,
Yeah,
so.
literally, you'd have like 15 cases in a day and no time to prep.
Right, and so everybody does things differently. I was kind of the OCD person that had to be in the office over the weekends because I can't just go in blind. The funny part about that is all of us, and for anybody that's known me longer than 5 seconds, I'm a rampant ADHD person. So I can pick it up and talk on the fly about anything, anytime, and make it sound good. And part of doing trials is just making it sound good, convincing somebody I could sell a car to a blind man. But I still wanted to actually know what was going on. So when I was in the DA's office, everywhere has its faults, but it was such a good environment to learn in. Yeah, you got thrown to the wolves, but we had people we could go to explain things to us. We had judges that would critique us, and not just to make us feel like shit, like to actually help us be better. I was raised as a baby DA by some wonderful private defense attorneys who took the time, when it wasn't their cases, to be available to take questions and help us understand, like, why am I doing this? What am I supposed to be doing? And and be able to ask questions. So it was a fun place to be. I clearly enjoy the rat race of the criminal system. It wasn't boring. I liked doing different. I learned a lot, but above and beyond that, I still have people in my life that I met when I started in the DA's office as an intern. And, I remember going into city court early on in my defense practice, and an officer coming up to me who I did not know from Adam, being like, "You on my case?" And I'm like, "No." And, "Well, how do you know you're not on my case?" "Well, I'm not on your case." And he starts to get loud. And I'm like, "I was down there to fill out a postponement. I'm not here on anybody's case."
Right.
So I'm pretty darn sure I'm not here on yours.
Well, they are kind of sharks at the courthouse when they see an attorney. They're like, "Oh, are you with it?"
This
You
is
good?" Yeah.
right, but no, and I was still nice, Natalie, at that point. Oh, you're fine. And and this back and forth exchange goes on, and well, you're just a defense attorney. I'm like, oh my God. And I see an old and dear friend of mine who's watching this and is like, I'm like, "Yeah, I got it. It's okay. It's fine. Lets it go for a little while." And he finally comes over and he pulls the guy up and he's like, "All right, you probably picked the wrong person. She's been around for a long time," because I was at city court as a prosecutor for over 4 years. Like, that was my home. This is what I do. This is where I go. I know where I'm going. You've been here 10 minutes and are still in diapers, but that's beside the point. I didn't go there with you. And, that I realized that so much had changed when I was talking to a couple of the judges about starting my defense practice, and they said to me, have you thought about going back to the DA's office? And I said, I thought about it. I loved it. I thought I would be there forever. I didn't want to continue to work 2 jobs because of the pay. I wanted my husband to be able to retire when that time came without it being catastrophic. But I never thought I would leave. The circumstances surrounding how and why, it was time. Mm-hmm. And the 2 judges both asked me, because we were all together, "Well, okay, you thought about it, you're not going, I said, "But I miss the DA's office. I do. I miss that part." And they're like, "You miss a time and a place that doesn't exist anymore." And that is so true for any of us that have been here in excess in the system of 15 years, because it was so, so different. I mean, we used to have lunch together. People look at me and I'm like, all of us, the DAs, the court staff, the PDs, the private attorneys if they were around, officers that had AM and PM court, the magistrates, we would all sit down and eat. Sometimes we'd order from Pepe's. Sometimes we would order from Pepe's. Sometimes we all packed. But we would all eat. And yeah, sometimes it would be a bunch of war stories, but we would all sit there as human beings. And, with that, as we all returned to court, we were in better headspaces for it. And we were better cops, lawyers, judges, magistrates for that time we spent together.
I mean, they can't do that now because most people don't spend more than a couple years in the DA's office anymore. They move on because they hate it. Mm-hmm. Nobody likes it anymore. Like when I was, 2018, when I was finishing up, they were just miserable. Everybody was miserable. Like, you knew the DAs that you didn't want to have, just like, the cops that you don't want to have. Mm-hmm. I would get a DA and I'd be like, "Oh, not this fucking clown again." Like, he doesn't give a shit. He's just going to fucking rush this thing in and out. And granted, I like to be in and out because, get that pay and go home. But
4 hours for one.
Like it was a joke that if you were going against a DA, you had a pretty good chance of having your shit thrown out. That was just a joke.
And the unfortunate part is, the turnover is high. It's always been high. People, it's a difficult job. It's a thankless job. I think all of these, I probably, as a defense attorney, have the most non-thankless, most rewarding job in the system. They have a lot. It's tough. It's a tough road to hoe. And I think what we're seeing so much of, honestly, is so much of what we all did was outside of the courtroom by having conversations with people about cases. And now, generally in society, nobody talks to each other, myself included. I'd rather get a text than a phone call. I'll admit it. But when you lose all that, and it breaks down, and then it just causes people to be unhappy, generally, because there's not that level of satisfaction, because you then have to learn and someday admit to yourself, I'm not getting satisfaction off a conviction. I'm not getting satisfaction off an acquittal, but we're no longer getting the satisfaction of the human interaction, which is actually what we needed and why we're in this, and we're no longer getting that. And so I think, I will say one of my favorite things to say is, and I mean no disrespect to prosecutors, because it's a joke I tell about myself. When I was at city court doing prelims, I thought I was hot shit. I thought I was a great, kick-ass, badass attorney. I mean, I was fantastic. And then I became a defense attorney. And then I realized it really doesn't take all that much skill and that much badassery to say, and then what happened?
True.
Wah, wah,
You know,
wah.
I have to admit that is one of the things that I miss most about working downtown in criminal defense. But everything's digital now. When I started, I had to type out the motion, print it out, print 7 copies of it or whatever they're asking for, walk it up to the courthouse, file it, walk it to the judge,
And run into each other
Run
on
in.
the way.
sit in there and shoot the shit with the
That's
secretaries.
society in general now. They don't, society in general, nobody wants to have contact with anybody else. It's the social media generation. Everybody wants to sit behind their phones or play their video games.
And it's coming out in the criminal system where it's most damaging to the people involved.
Yeah.
Yeah. So let's go back to something you mentioned very early on, mental health. So do you see a lot of mental health, substance abuse, alcoholism within the legal aspect of it amongst lawyers and what you do?
I think the primary thing that I see and I'm a part of from the lawyer end of things is mental health is a tough subject for people to talk about. Addiction is a lot easier for people to talk about. Everybody tells the war stories about being at the Grand Street bar and the judges at the bar and the lawyers drinking and then this and there's no issue with it. It's part of the
It's the culture.
yes. But what nobody wants to talk about, I mean, you say something about mental health and everybody's like, deuces, I'm out.
Yeah.
And yeah, we all know that they can be companion things. I happen to fall on the mental health end of things, minus the addiction end of things. But once you start broaching that with people, like I became a peer volunteer with the LCL, which is Lawyers Concerned for Lawyers. Mainly what they deal with is substance abuse issues. They do have a mental health arm, which I and some, other attorneys
It's like
are
a
part
map.
of.
It's like the MAP programs and the law enforcement,
Correct.
member assistance programs.
Correct.
Okay.
It's the only approved system for us that's approved by the Supreme Court. When I first started telling people, first of all, everybody basically gave me I didn't know you were drunk look. Well, I'm not. If I wouldn't have an issue owning, what my thing. I don't fall in that category, but by the grace of God. But at the same time, I'm like, no, I'm part of it, for the mental health aspect. And then you get an even worse look, which is, and I think one of the things is, what we do as attorneys, we have to use our brains constantly. And we have to think of everything that could, would, didn't, might happen. Every 8,000 aspects. And it gets tiring and your brain gets tired and we get burned out. And, nobody wants to talk about the fact that burnout is a real thing. ADHD is a real thing. Anxiety is a real thing. Depression's a real thing. And, in myself included, it was a very long time where I was like, not comfortable talking about it because, especially for me, it's hard enough to make your way in the system as a woman, but then you throw that in there and you just put yourself way behind the 8 ball because everybody has struggles, whether it's a diagnosable struggle or everybody has struggles. We're people. But as soon as you start talking about it, it's like, there's something wrong with you. And, it gets to the point where I would venture to say, it is almost impossible to do any job in this system without it's taking its toll on you as a human being. because of the shit that we see and live every single day. And whether it's a diagnosis or not, that doesn't mean it isn't an issue. And the fact that we don't somehow, I have no idea how it would be accomplished, but have those little bits of time that we used to when human interaction existed, and it was called happy hour, doesn't necessarily have to involve drinking, but where we can all sit there and commiserate and bitch, and where somebody else, you can be like, how about this shit that happened today? If you say that to a regular person not in the system, you do sound batshit crazy.
Yeah.
And, you know, and you get to the point where I started talking about it to people, and they're like, to other lawyers, and it's like, oh, well. I mean, I think, I'm not a psychiatrist, I'm not a therapist, licensed therapist. I mean, it's part of what we all do as humans to help each other. But, you know, the fact that I have ADHD is a huge benefit to me professionally, because it is actually because my brain works at 100,000 miles an hour, not because I'm smart, it's just, it works too fast, is the only way I can go into court and do what I do every day and be able to do it. And I would venture to say that's probably true for a lot of us. Don't know, but nobody wants to talk about it. But as soon as somebody does, then it's like, blah, from everybody else. Like, it all starts coming out, and you start bringing it up. And, you know, a big thing, like when I talk to cadets, and I'm like, there's more to your life. That's why I started the way that I did. Who I am and what I do are not the same thing.
No.
It's not, it does not define who I am. Everybody thinks it does, because what's the first thing anybody asks them? What do you do? Before they probably even ask your first or last name. That's not who we are, you know? And so I think that it takes its toll. I think that there's probably, you know, a lot of us out there that have stuff going on, but everybody's so, it's kind of our version of what law enforcement sees. We are so fearful of, you know, and I thought about this last night and lost sleep over it. I'm like, how many clients am I going to lose because I'm going to sit here and talk about mental health issues, and they're going to think that, you know, I don't know what I'm doing, or, you know, she might be crazy, or this, that, or the other thing. So nobody wants to talk about it. And certainly, you know, women are more inclined than men to talk about these things. But you start realizing that these are very real things for people, and especially in the system, because of what we see every day. We can laugh about it. It's the twisted part of all of us. Like, how else are you going to handle it? I mean, we see blood and guts and gore, and we figure out ways to poke at each other and set each other off and undermine each other. I mean, this is literally what we do for fun, is try to figure that out. So I think it probably plays a role. I hate the fact that there is such a stigma, that it has to be a negative. Like, we talk about mental illness. Okay, we can change it to be more PC to mental health. Everybody still has the same connotations pop into their head. But without the heart and soul that are the things that may predispose us to having struggles, then we shouldn't be doing what we're doing.
Yeah, so like I was just thinking, to tie it kind of into my recovery, just the thought of mental health, because like I am dual diagnosis, you know, I
didn't know you went both ways.
I do go both ways.
Sorry.
I mean, so do you.
Welcome to the Steel City Roundtable.
Oh, please let me swallow. Never mind. Go on.
Well, I was gonna say, when I go to a meeting, or I go to a new meeting, and I'm talking to somebody, and they're like, "Oh, what do you do for a living?" And I'm like, "Oh, I'm a paralegal secretary," and they're like, or I'm paralegal, and they go, "And you're here?" "Yeah, I'm here, man." Or I say I'm bipolar, and they're like, "But you're a paralegal." And I'm like, just because I'm a paralegal and I do something that's an intellectual thing does not mean that I cannot have a mental health diagnosis.
I mean, we were talking about it before the show started. Like, I am a 100% believer that all addicts have some sort of mental health, but not all people with mental health are addicts. Example, you're not an addict, but you have mental health issues. This is one of the reasons why we started this whole project, was because I mean, I personally got tired of the looks I got when I told people that I was diagnosed with PTSD and depression. They're like, well, what do you do? I was like, oh, I was a police officer, now I'm a truck driver. Like, you have PTSD? Like, you didn't see anybody killed. Like, that's not how it works. You know, PTSD is any traumatic incident in someone's life that has not been processed, addressed, dealt with, handled, whatever you want to say, leaves a mark on your soul.
You have to be military to
anybody.
have experienced it. Not that the majority of them have experienced it, but
I think every law enforcement, every fireman, everybody that works in EMS in a
Absolutely.
legal situation has some type of PTSD, because it is impossible, fucking impossible, to have a case where you had a 12-year-old girl that was raped by some sick fuck and not let it affect you. It's impossible. Maybe not in that day or that hour that you're in a courtroom, but it lives with you. Whether you know it or not, it lives in there somewhere. And at some point, that bad shit comes out. The difference is that people like me, who are alcoholics, we had a problem, and our problem was dealing with the other underlying problem that manifested itself. So for me, it was mental health. Mental health, undiagnosed, is what led me to drinking in the quantities that I drank. I love to drink, period, but to take it to that whole other level was, it was probably the most difficult and the best thing that ever happened to me when I was diagnosed with mental health issues. Because I was like, oh, now I fucking get it, And that's why we do this, is because, mental health addiction, they don't just affect, the guy down on Grant Street with a brown paper bag and a 40-ounce, Colt 45 in there. It's attorneys, doctors, surgeons, lawyers, the guy that drives your school bus for your kids might be an alcoholic, but the more we talk about this, the more we take a proactive stance on trying to address the issues. Society in general is reactive. It's completely reactive. Police departments, fire departments, legal firms. The entire society we live in is reactive. Until something bad happens that draws your attention to that aspect, nobody gives a fuck about it. Or they just brush it under the carpet.
because, and this is a huge, I think, difficulty for law enforcement. So you're a law enforcement officer, and we'll just go with PTSD because I'm also a firm believer, and there's no way that you are any player in the system without having PTSD. There's no way. Whether you're looking, at a defense trial and they're putting up all kinds of pictures of this, that, or the other thing, or, those of us that have had very close friends either die by suicide or get killed in the line of duty, there's no way, I didn't stand there and watch his head get blown off, but there's no way that doesn't have an effect. So it's not exactly like, Officer Joe Blow can walk into his station and be like, yo, LT, I'm struggling today. I can be like, put your fucking big boy pants on and go get in your police car. And, and the same with, we can't, some of us do and have, but like, what are, the trials don't stop, whether you're, literally able to or not, thankfully, but we've all built coping mechanisms. So, who knows?
Some are healthy, some
are healthy, some are not. Who knows? But, I think what a great idea it would be to reserve a room and have, but this would be difficult to, without a bunch of us loudmouths really promoting this, have a bunch of basically cops and defense attorneys sit in a room and just bullshit with each other.
Like a weird waiting room.
Yeah.
Go bowling.
It's the Beetlejuice
Okay, go
waiting
bowling.
room.
Like, we don't all, and now, like, post-COVID, when the bars shut down and nobody goes to happy hour anymore because COVID happened, okay, maybe eliminating that part was kind of good. Now everybody just closet drinks. But, to sit down and just be able to have that, since we're not doing it on a day-to-day basis, do that so it becomes natural on a day-to-day basis. When I see you in court, before we get to the nitty-gritty of it, be like, hey, how are you? How's the family? What's going on? People inevitably ask me, well, how did your husband feel about it when you became a defense attorney? And I'm like, he's my husband. He married me. He didn't marry my job. I mean, I happened to be at the DA's office when we got married, but he didn't marry I thank God, because, we're not much fun. Thankfully, person me is a little better than lawyer me and less bitchy-ish.
Sometimes.
Sometimes. But until we start being able to do stuff like that, and they're like, well, what about, you can't have any friends? And I thought back, and I thought, when I moved my office from downtown to Blawnox, the first person that came to see me was an officer I'd known for a very, very long time and a very good friend of mine. And the first thing that I put in my office, other than my logo, like my signage, on the inside of my window, I was given one by my husband and one by my dear friend. And on either sides of the door, when you walked in on the windows, were thin blue line stickers. And I kept those there with pride. And yes, I had clients be like, what is up with that? Well, first of all, just from a common sense perspective, people need to realize that it's probably in your best interest that I know this many people, not because I'm special, but just because we can work through things a lot more efficiently. You know, but I have things like in my office, wherever my office was my St. Michael's statue, because that's meaningful to me. Part of the reason why it's meaningful to me is I am married to a police officer. That does not make me a worse defense attorney. Actually, it's great because I can talk through things with him now that he's retired and there's no chances
Yeah, like,
of the case.
you think this case is
Like,
fucked up or what?
Like, what do you think? Or what am I just reading too much into it? Because again, get stuck in my own head, you know. And I think that and that's how things start to come to light, is those relationships. But I think it's very difficult for people with the personalities that we all have to really be able to talk about it. I think because so many of us have been taught and trained and geared towards it's a deficiency. It's, you know, and I love phrases, they're so Instagram trendy and I'm so not, clearly, but like I love phrases like neurospicy. Like, let's say something that's like a cool thing. And I will admit that I couldn't do what I do because I have to think fast on my feet. I have to put something together really, 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 really fast and be able to say it, make it sound good, have basis. But the fact that I can read it and this all happens so quickly is what makes me better at what I do. It's not a negative. It's an existing thing. It's not a negative. Not to say that it can't be, or, you know, you're just tired because you'd like to get a good night's sleep and turn your brain off. But, you know, I think that it's mental health struggles, in my opinion, are very, very common in the court system, specifically in the criminal court system. And I think that, you know, the addiction end of things is a lot more comfortable for people to talk about than the mental health. I think that
I don't know who you're talking about. It was impossible for me to talk about.
Yeah, I didn't want to tell anybody that I was an addict. I didn't want to tell anybody. I'd tell anybody that would listen I'm bipolar.
But yes, but no. Our end of things doesn't necessarily. Everybody goes out and drinks and goes to happy hour. Nobody's saying they're an alcoholic, and I'm not saying they are either. I'm not in someone else's head. But, like, it's a much more comfortable thing to talk about, whoa, I drank way too much last night, than be like, I didn't take my meds last night.
Yeah, it makes sense. It makes
yeah.
sense.
Okay.
In that respect, like, nobody's admitting to being an addict until they're forced to, you know, I think in any area of the world. But I think that, you know, it's something that's just very, very difficult for people to talk about. And even, you know, you suffered a loss of whatever kind, for people to talk about being in therapy is like, oh dear God. And it's a sorely, sorely lacking aspect of law enforcement that really needs to happen, and it needs to exist, because I'm really tired of my friends eating their guns.
Yeah.
Because it's not dealt with.
real.
If I have to go to one more closed casket where someone swallowed their Glock, I'm just gonna lose my shit.
I don't blame you. That's awful.
And it doesn't need to happen, and it's stuff that bleeds into people's families. And these, you know, these officers, mostly men, and that's my tilt, so I'll say him, their wives deal with it tangentially, which can result in their own PTSD, and their kids deal with it. And then we're just keeping this cycle going of people that don't know how to process emotions because they haven't been taught, and nobody gives them the opportunity to have that softer end, because it would be a detriment. But until you can put it out, you can't put it in the right compartment. So then it just looms there.
Yeah.
I mean,
You can't compartmentalize it because it doesn't exist. It's just the gloomy cloud.
when I was in my addiction, and, you know, the only thing that I could do was my job. Like, my life suffered everywhere else. It suffered at work too, but like, work was the only place I could go, you know, to quiet the mind and focus on other things. And it came down to that day where, you know, I almost swallowed a fucking bullet for me to get sober. And that's such a sad thing, because we all still think we have to deal with things on our own. We're so afraid, as you said, we're so afraid to put it out there that we have mental health issues. And we're afraid to put it out there that we're an addict or an alcoholic, because, you know, are people going to think of me differently? Are the judges going to think of me differently?
Am
Are
I gonna
my
lose
coworkers,
business?
am I going to lose business? Like, you being you know, having your own business, like, you know, there's a lot of risks in talking about those things, but I appreciate you. And I appreciate your honesty and your willingness to sit here and talk about these things, because, you know what? The people out there that don't talk about it,
are probably the ones that need to talk about it the most.
I mean, that's like step one of recovery is what? Hitting rock bottom
Yep.
or rock bottom's basement, wherever you're going to go, and figuring out that something has to change. But then you have to do something with that information. The information in your head that's driving you up a wall, you have to do something with it. I always refer to it as a dumpster. You can only stuff so much shit in a dumpster before it fills out on the ground. And once it's on the ground, it's too late. Mm-hmm. It's so much easier to adjust your storage facility than it is to find a new one after the shit hit the ground.
I like that analogy. Can I use that?
Sure. Use it in court, and so let me know you use it.
All right.
Make sure it's televised.
That's
trademark, by the way.
No, I won't make sure it's televised. I am not the media person, and it's funny that you say that. I had an attorney that trained me when I was in the DA's office who made it his goal to use a line or more than one monster line from a Meatloaf song in every jury trial. And I've adopted that and tried to keep it going. So I filter in things that other people tell me, and I'm like, I got to find a way to use that. But I think, like you said, and I don't know how to accomplish this. We can only do our small parts, but like I say to people, I say to every single person that I meet in this system, especially the young lawyers, if you stop for a second, acknowledge it's not this side, that side, my side, your side. If you need something or you need to vent, there's only so many of us that understand this, and I said it to police officer recruits. If you need to, as long as we don't have a case together at that very time, call me. Well, it's, off work time, off hours time, and I think that there's got to be a way to do this. I think that a lot of departments are trying to do a better job, but also you have to acknowledge that they may not want to talk to their FTO about it. I don't know where these places are or how we would accomplish it. And maybe it's nothing more than what brings everybody more comfort and makes everybody a little bit healthier is just knowing you're not the only one and there's other people out there. And guess what? There's other people in this system that are dealing with shit. There's other cops, there's other lawyers, there's other judges. I don't know, I'm not a judge, I never will be in this county, but if nothing else, it exists and we see you. And if you want to be seen and you want to see us, let me know.
The fucked up thing, once again, is that it's been a reactive process. These things weren't in place in 2007 when I started. You had when in 2009 when the 3 officers got murdered up in Stanton Heights, like they had people come to the stations and whatnot. But, it really wasn't like, what are you going to accomplish going to a room with 50 people that are crying? Like, you're not going to accomplish a fucking thing. And guess what? We're not calling you. Because who are you?
Well, that being, birds of the feather, you don't understand what.
Yes, exactly.
What is going on.
And that transition, we had John Atkinson, city medic, on here a couple weeks ago. And he talked about how, like, their MAP program has, like, younger medics, older medics, so different worlds of experience. I guess what I'm getting at is the sad thing is they're doing something about it now, but why weren't they doing this 15, 20, 30 years ago? Like, mental health is not new. Addiction is not new.
The ADHD thing, my psychiatrist wants me to get tested for ADHD. And here's the thing, when I was a kid, there wasn't any ADHD. You just were an overactive kid. You needed
to calm the fuck down.
Yeah,
go play sports.
You needed your ass beat. Don't give them caffeine.
And you weren't disciplined because when I was a kid, because again that was before your time, it was ADD and it was just like the little boy running around the playground. It didn't exist for those, or if it did, it was used as a negative, and it was you didn't have discipline. Just go sit down and study.
And then they went through that period where everybody was being put on the spectrum and everybody was being
also true.
Categorized as having this, and that, and like. The difference between a 14-year-old kid that's just hyperactive and a 14-year-old kid at ADHD is like, I don't know, one check mark on a fucking list. Like, how does that work? We're so quick to put people in a category. We're so quick to say, well, you're this, you're mental health.
You're this,
you're an addict. You're this.
Sacrifice credibility and integrity for easy boxes.
It's one of the reasons why I didn't get sober the first time I tried to get sober. Like, I didn't stay sober is because I was worried that people were going to judge me differently. So I was like, oh, I'm good, I'm healed, I'm fine. It's all good. But still, people knew I was an alcoholic. I didn't know I had mental health at that point. But people knew I was an alcoholic. Like, just trying to get sober and doing anything about it, especially if you go to a rehab facility or especially if you reach out to your HR department and use FMLA to go on leave for like 12 weeks to go get treated, people are so afraid to do these things. They're so afraid to ask for help, and I'm not just saying addiction, I'm saying mental health in general, because guess what? Mental health probably kills a lot more people than addiction does. I think that's just a standard fact, because more people have mental health than have addiction, and the fact that we don't talk about it, the fact that we don't put it out there and tell people like, hey, listen, if you want to go to rehab, contact your HR department. Tell them you want FMLA. Tell them you want medical, and tell them to pound salt. It's none of their fucking business. I didn't know that until I went to rehab. I didn't know that I could get time off from work, paid for by the government, get short-term disability, and all I had to tell my boss was that I need some time off. Granted, your internals, the people that sign the checks, they got to know what's going on. But other than that, you can go away for up to 12 weeks guaranteed, and nobody knows.
Well, I was going to say, I didn't know that.
Yeah, I was gone for almost 13 weeks. I was off for almost 13 weeks. But I called my company. I said, hey, I called my boss directly because I'm just that guy. And I trust my boss that he would do the right thing and not treat me like shit. And I said, hey, listen, I'm a fucking drunk, and I don't know what the fuck to do. I'm going to rehab. He's like, okay, let me make some phone calls. And then they're like, do you want to take FMLA? I'm like, what the fuck's FMLA? It's a stupid way to spell family. I don't know what it means, right? And they're like, well, you can take time off under FMLA. And so they said, contact the HR department, tell them you want FMLA. They'll explain the whole process, because they weren't read up on it enough to tell me how it worked. And they said, you have 12 weeks guaranteed by the federal government, up to 12 weeks. And you can either take personal or medical. Medical makes sense, medical, right? Personal is just to take time off. If you take personal, you're probably not going to get short-term disability. But if you take medical, you can get short-term disability. So I was paid for the time I was off, getting treated and getting my head right and getting healthy. Just so you know, can I show everybody?
Sure.
No, just kidding. Yeah, she just said she has to go to the bathroom, so we're going to wrap this shit up here pretty soon. No, but I fucking lost my train of thought.
I'm sorry.
It's
I
all right.
tried to avoid that.
It happens all the time. But the FMLA is great because it's a way for you to protect your anonymity amongst your coworkers and amongst your employer. The only people that know are the people that can't talk about it because it's protected by HIPAA.
And I guarantee you, no matter what field you work in, there's probably this many people that may know that information.
Yeah, and I try to put that out every time we talk about going to rehab, because if I wouldn't have done that, I mean, I might not have gone, because I didn't want to give up $20,000.
Legit fear.
With the regime that's in the government right now and how high inflation is, you can't afford to not get paid.
Right.
And my bosses actually came back to me and said, hey, you filled out the wrong paperwork. You filled out personal. You need to fill out the medical side. So,
and there need to be
to
more
my
bosses
company,
like
you
that.
guys know who you are. You rock. I'm sober with the assistance of you, not because of you, just with your help. But yeah. So last question I have for you is, what made you come on our podcast today? You were just bored on a Sunday?
No. Back to wife and mom. Sundays are not boring in my life. I kind of found out about it by Facebook, and because Kelly and I are Facebook friends, and I'm like, that's kind of neat. There were a lot of things that I didn't know had been going on in Kelly's life that I kind of found out after the fact. And we just kind of started shooting the shit about it. And it's a big thing for me, I think, because generally, whether it's about mental health or anything, human beings don't talk enough, and we turn each other off, and we've lost the ability for civil discord. We've just lost the ability to talk. So whether it was a viable subject or something that would fit for me or not, I just thought it was cool. People are sitting down and talking about shit that other people don't want to talk about. Somebody's got to talk about it, whatever it is. Whether it's, you and I sitting here going back and forth on, cops and their egos and defense attorneys being assholes. And these are the things that aren't happening enough. So that's kind of, what prompted me to want to. But I will be honest, there was a huge fear aspect for me of, this may not go well. This, in the sense of, for me, this may cost me business. Therefore, it impacts my family. And so, that was a discussion that I had to have with my family of, it potentially could, because again, we think about everything that could possibly happen, even no matter how remote.
Even if it's not even going to happen.
Correct. And, what if I have aspirations down the road and somebody's going to look, and there are certain things that just, as you saw, I'm not going down the slippery slope. I'm not going to shoot myself that much in the foot. And then what it really came down to is you can either continue to bitch about something being a problem, or you can actually step up and do something about it. And that may not be much. I'm not going to put a billboard on the side of the road. I don't have that ability or desire. But whether it's mental health or just people being able, from different places and different bents in life and different opinions and thoughts, we all need to be able to sit down and talk again and be able to disagree. Because to be honest, a flagship of my life is, as an attorney and as a human, and I teach my kids this, or I try to teach my kids this, hopefully it will gel as they get older. You can't fully know your opinions or your beliefs or your thoughts unless you fully understand the other side and the opposing viewpoint. Because unless you do, you don't have a full grasp, because you only have part of it. And what kind of finally made the decision is, I had been in just kind of a place for a while, and just kind of was like, go along, get along. I'm going to do my job. I'm going to do it well. But I'd kind of lost a little bit of the sparky, annoying, maddening, whatever you want to define it, part of me, like the more loudmouth part of me. And I was like, why is this happening? And I think just because it no longer had an avenue, like we didn't all just sit down and talk anymore, shoot the shit or vent or whatever it is, and we all just got quieter and quieter and quieter. And I was like, I'm not a quiet person. Like, I'm not an extrovert. I'm not going to see it, but I need that certain level of whoop, and at the same time I was like, well, I'm also the wackadoo that decided at almost 49 years old to take up CrossFit. Who does that?
Crazy people.
And in something like, well, but I want to, be loud about that too. And you can either live out loud or you can just not. But life isn't a spectator sport, and until we all stop allowing it to be, it's just going to keep going downhill.
As I was told as a kid, life sucks, wear a helmet. But speaking
Helmet
for me,
wearing, window licking, kind of special.
oh, that's
Yes.
That's me.
me. Yeah, if you don't mind, I'm going to speak for both of us. But we're so glad that you came on.
I'm so glad you had
This was
me.
amazing to sit here and talk to you and shoot the shit. And you are welcome here anytime you want, as a guest, as a host. You name it, you got a seat.
Yep.
Well, I appreciate it. Thank you guys very much.
Is there anything you want to tell the people that our 50 YouTube subscribers that are watching this? Is there anything you want to say?
Oh, there's a number of things, but number one, life is not a spectator sport. Stop making it one. If you are someone that's struggling with anything, whether it's stuff we've talked about or just something else, or you stubbed your toe and it's bothering you more than you think it should, know that there's people around. Call me. I go research Natalie Snyder law. Feel free to also do that if you happen to get a DUI or charged with a crime. There's my plug for my business. But I think until we start not just acknowledging, everybody says you're not alone, but until we actively stop making people be alone, things aren't going to change. So that's my part. I'm here. We're here. Go lace up your combat boots and lock and load and get to work and fix yourself.
Awesome. Kel's earrings.
Oh, earrings. What am I wearing today? Oh, these ones are my.
Fucking screws.
I have screws in my ears.
Oh, I love it.
But these are vintage. Feathers, black feathers with a heart, and I don't know, they make noise. I found them at a flea market. That's it. I mean, they're one of my favorites. They hang down. They match all my clothes.
Awesome.
Do your ears
Like I give a
hang
shit.
low? Sorry.
Anyway. Well, folks, thanks again for joining us. Natalie Snyder, thank you.
Thank you.
As always, reach out for help if you need it. There's always someone there to talk to. You just got to be willing to look for it, and you got to be willing to accept the help. There's always a seat here for you at the Steel City Roundtable. We love you guys. Continue to watch, because we're going to continue to put out great content. We will see you next time.
Bye.